Okay, great. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our 10 questions presentation today, virtually. I'm sad, as I said in my emails before, that I wasn't able to fly to Nashville, have some great food, see everyone, but I hope everybody is keeping well and safe and everything in the current times. So we're going to introduce ourselves properly in a minute. My name is Nathan. I'm one of the recruiters here at Major Lindsey Africa. And today's presentation really is just talking about, how it's never too early to think about your career and, the options available to you ahead. And we're going to kind of go through this a little bit quicker than we, normally would, because we want to, give it a ton of time for questions at the end, I'm sure. So lots of uncertainty. So there we go. So as I mentioned, hi, I'm Nathan Peart, and I'm a recruiter in the Associate Practice Group at Major Lindsey Africa. So I'm actually based in the London office. I used to be based in New York until last year, and then COVID sort of had a bit of change to that. I've been at MLA for 8 years, and I started in London originally, and then I spent some time in Hong Kong and New York. And I recruit across all practice areas, all levels, and everything like that. And I'll let Rebecca introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Glatzer. Hopefully you recognize me. I've got my long COVID hair instead of my short non-COVID hair going on with the slide. I am from Atlanta, Georgia originally. I cover the Southeast for MLA, which includes Tennessee, the Carolinas. I kind of dip into Florida on occasion, Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, of course. I practiced for about 6.5 years before I got into recruiting, first as a real estate attorney, and then unfortunately the Great Recession sort of put an end to my real estate practice. And after that was a divorce attorney for another 4.5 and some change before, again, getting into recruiting. So excited to talk to you guys today. Happy to answer your questions. And as Nathan said, we're going to zip through this topic fairly quickly so that we can get to your present questions.
Absolutely. Just one thing as well. We normally when we're in person, we use Slido as a way to do questions. So you just go on the website and type in 90906, and it's just a way for you to post questions. I know some people don't like doing it in a chat, or no questions ever too silly or anything like that. So please feel free to use that, and we'll come back to it at the end as well, and you can and ask questions there if you have anything. But obviously, if you want to unmute yourself or something like that at the end of the presentation, we're also happy to speak to that. But yeah, we'll dive in. So Rebecca's going to talk about why all this matters.
Yeah, definitely. So why are we talking about this today to you guys? Why are we talking about picking a practice area when some of you are only in your 1L or 2L years? And the first thing is, thinking about the future starting now is never a bad idea. Also, when you're thinking about practice area, people say to me sometimes, well, the law degree is a generalist degree. Why does it matter? I can switch later. It doesn't really matter, unless I'm getting a tax LLM or some sort of, plan to be in a niche specialty that requires extra certification or knowledge. Who cares? But the reality of the matter, and this was actually something I learned the hard way, it is difficult to switch practice areas, particularly the more senior you get in your career. And that, frankly, has a lot to do with the economics of practicing law. Your time is money, through a sense, in the legal profession. And so it becomes more and more difficult to retrain you and more expensive to retrain you the more senior you get. And sometimes folks get stuck. And so we would like for you to start exploring this idea now.
Slide. Cool. So, we're going to run through these topics. There's 10 questions. I don't need to kind of read them all out because you can obviously see them on the screen, and we'll work through each one and sort of prompt some questions and everything like that. Okay, so the first one is what topics are you attracted to? So we kind of like to think this in a little bit of a different way. So, really the question is who you want to help and how do you want to help them? And we've kind of, got these broad categories that practice areas generally fit into that can kind of prompt you to think about, what you want to do day to day. So with people, think about do you like interacting with people on a daily basis? You know, is it natural to you? Is it something you enjoy? You know, there's no judgment here. These are just you knowing yourself. You know, some practice areas offer greater connectivity with clients, and you know, things like employment, entertainment, exec comp. You know, they're all very people focused. Immigration, trust and estate, white collar crime. You know, you're sort of helping somebody essentially stay out of prison in white collar crimes. There's a lot of personal interaction there, a lot of close contact. And is that something you're comfortable with? You know, when you think about ideas, you know, law school classes are designed to have you think about legal arguments and, you know, how you interpret the law. You know, some of these topics are complex and very intellectually challenging. Do you like that? Do you like being challenged on an intellectual level, and sort of, you know, working through those discussions? You know, things like tax, IP litigation, ERISA, antitrust, they're all, you know, very sort of idea focused practices that require intense sort of technical thinking. Things, you know, when we're talking about things, it's something tangible, something you can think about and know and see in the real world. You know, like aeroplanes or buildings or whatever. You know, is that something you think is cool, that you can walk down the street and see something you help finance, or, you know, use something that's that finance that way? And you know, things like asset finance, project finance, real estate finance or real estate transactions, energy practices, you know, all of those things can sort of really, you know, go into that practice. And finally, money and business. You know, is this something that interests you? Do you like the idea of working on behalf of big corporations, big companies, you know, emerging companies, startups? You know, is it interesting to you if you know, a company can survive by getting another round of financing, if they're launching a new product? And that might necessarily be something physical. It could be like a financial product, something. You know, these things like corporate M&A, leverage finance, acquisition finance, capital market, securities, all can kind of feed into these sort of practices in terms of a topic-based approach. And now Rebecca's going to move on to the next one. Sorry, my click is not working now. Over to her.
That's perfect. How you envision your role as an attorney, and I probably should have said this in the beginning before jumping in. You know, the idea today is to get you thinking about these things. Unfortunately, many folks don't start thinking about them until after they graduate, after they pass the bar, after they found the first job. And these are things you really should be sort of contemplating now as you consider opportunities. Similarly, I will say for myself, again, when I was a divorce attorney for about 4 years, there were lots and lots of things that I did not like about being a divorce attorney, namely going to court. And this is, you know, learn from someone who made some mistakes like me. I was not a good litigator. I did not enjoy going to court. But there were things about the practice that I really did enjoy. And frankly, I do a lot of this in my current recruiting role, which is why it's a good fit. I finally started thinking about these things like 6.5 years out, and probably could have saved myself some heartache if I started thinking about them sooner. And one of the things that I loved doing is being sort of a Sherpa for someone through the court system. You know, people are coming to you because they're getting a divorce. Many times they've never, ever been to court, and they're intimidated, and they don't understand the process. And sitting with them one-on-one and explaining the process to them, I love that. I got such a high from just, you know, feel like giving them some reassurances. So this next part is like, how do you envision your role as an attorney? You know, do you think of yourself as a leader and you kind of are a little bit of a soloist, or you enjoy kind of, you know, representing a team, leading a team, being the person who's in charge and who's making a decision? On the flip side, do you like being a team member? Do you like working in groups? Do you like group projects? Did you like group work in school? Do you, you know, are you collaborative in nature, or do you really like the buck to stop with you and you didn't like group projects in school, you don't like group projects now, and you really want to be kind of, you know, the person that's driving the matter or the litigation or the project?
Next topic is moral conundrums. Next thing to think about. So, you know, this is something you kind of do some soul searching on? Do you mind this? Is it matter to you? Is it an issue? It can impact your job satisfaction and what you enjoy doing. And like not everything's black and white, and there's lots of kind of cogs to this. But we've sort of summarized here where we think, if you do mind facing a conundrum, then you're probably better sticking to the S list. Practices that are maybe not so full of the moral issues, but if you kind of enjoy that, the no list works. So just some examples: tax. How do you feel about creating offshore funds? Where the money is basically outside the scope of US tax laws. How do you feel in project finance about a controversial oil and gas project or a pipeline, and how that has an impact on the environment? Product liability, defending drug manufacturers, on any issues if something that caused a sort of deadly outcome to a group of people. Employment laws such as spectrum on there, discrimination, sexual harassment, all sorts of things that you can be on both sides of the fence there in terms of who you're representing and how you feel about that. And so these are, the moral question is always something to think about and, decide how that might shape your practice area as well.
So the next idea to sort of think about is, do you want to be an expert or a generalist? If you are practicing, again, I'm using my own sort of personal experience as an example, if you want to be a corporate generalist, a lot of that work, is sort of transferable from geography to geography. If you're getting into the tax laws of being a corporate attorney, again, federal tax law is something that's sort of transferable, and you're kind of a Jack or Jane of all knowledge in that sort of, the kind of umbrella area. On the flip side, if you're doing something like family law that is done on a sort of state-by-state level, not necessarily easily transferable, depending on, the family law, the laws and the regulations that oversee family law in California are very, very different than those in Atlanta, Georgia, for example. And so that's another sort of level to think about. And you really, if you're a tax attorney or you're a ERISA attorney, if you're a family law attorney or an immigration attorney, you're really getting into sort of like the minutia of, the differences between what can be done in various states, or from sub-niche to sub-niche. I'm thinking of real estate, where like if you're doing hospitality, real estate law, or you're doing zoning work, you're gonna need to roll up your sleeves and really get into the minutia of that to be of service to your clients. Where if you're a general commercial litigator or general conflict litigator, you're kind of, the court system, and that's your sort of the niche part of your practice, and then you're constantly learning new things as different clients and different matters come your way. And you want to think about sort of your comfort level with that. I myself, again, learned this sort of retroactively. I really like being an expert and feeling like I can speak with authority, and kind of rolling up my sleeves and getting into the nitty gritty of a particular area of the law. I feel sort of uncomfortable and almost like the ground is shifting below me if, I'm sort of tap dancing and I don't know all the things about topic X. So you want to sort of think about that. It's not something I really sort of considered before the practice of law. I didn't really have to. And I think it would have been really helpful to me to start thinking about this again earlier on in the process.
Just to add briefly, I think because I put the notes on the slide on, in New York as well, your corporate practices tend to be a lot more siphoned and distinct, and that's why maybe in DC, California, you can be a bit more of a generalist, and sometimes location can have an impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say to Nathan's point, like to put a little finer point on that. So in New York, because again, the deals are massive and the clients are massive and the firms are massive, you might be doing a very specific niche, private equity work only, or corporate M&A only, or corporate governance work only, or venture capital work only. And this is all under the corporate umbrella. Whereas if you move, and I say this again because I do a lot of work in the Southeast. If you decide to practice in the South, you're going to do a little bit of all of this. And it's, again, a bit structural. It has to do with the size of the clients down here. It has to do with the size of the firms. If you do corporate work, south of DC, generally speaking, you're going to be dabbling in all of those things.
Excellent. Would you be attracted to a code-based practice? So, again, another way to think of this is, do you like analyzing gray areas, or do you like concrete answers and concrete ideas? If you think about, your time at law school and things that you're doing, you can argue the facts of a case and also, the law that applies. But do you feel more comfortable basically when you have a starting point? Code-based practices are, you obviously have statute or regulatory things that, will help guide you in as you're seeking answers and direction. And obviously, all of these things are interpretation. It's quite a broad brush we're painting here. But, if you do like that code thing, things like, antitrust, regulatory practices, securities, tax, all have some kind of code to start with that you have a foundation for your advice and your ideas. How that maybe to corporate litigation, where things are a bit more fluid and moving in different kind of ways. And so, you don't always have the same concrete ideas, and you've got to think a bit more out of the box and, kind of work with that and mold through it.
So the next consideration, are you comfortable with an adversarial practice? And I'll tell a little personal story again. I learned this the hard way. I was not, and sort of got, thrust, if you will, because of economic forces or just because of my own not being self-aware. My name is Rebecca, and it actually means peacemaker. That might shed a little bit of light on how I am not into kind of this scorched earth litigation idea. And unfortunately, I had the misfortune of the last law firm that I worked for before I got into recruiting. The partners really had this by any means necessary mentality when it came to litigation. They prided themselves in being uber aggressive. It was not a good fit, as you might imagine, and it's part of the reason I left. So it's something that you kind of need to think about and know about for yourself. And I'll say more about this at the end of we'll talk more about this at the end of our presentation. But, if you're saying to yourself as you're listening to this, well, how do I figure this out? Like, how do I know if I'm comfortable with it? If it's something that you can't answer for yourself very quickly, your career services group department there at Vandy has a wealth of resources, and there are resources on the web where it's something like Myers-Briggs or books that try to help figure this out, and they can definitely point you in the right direction. And so for me, as I mentioned before, family law was not the best fit. Now, we're painting with a broad brush here, and I want to kind of add this a little bit. There are family law practices that are not per se adversarial, or the mentality of the firm is such that they're really trying to settle out of court. And often you will find that is the mentality and the hope of firms that deal in this sort of rarefied air of the very, very wealthy. Basically, those people generally don't want their dirty laundry aired in open court. And so I might have been able to stay in family law had I known that at the time and had kind of pursued working for an entity that really didn't have this sort of scorched earth mentality when it came to litigation. Whether those opportunities would have been available to me is a different question. So again, keep in mind that we are very much painting with a broad brush when we make these distinctions. So adversarial, corporate, again, at times, sometimes the parties involved, if everything's happy-go-lucky and the person's happy to sell and the person's happy to buy, and it's great. Sometimes the transaction's occurring under duress for various reasons. So it can be a little bit adversarial. Family law, as I said before. Employment, if someone did something that was a violation of corporate practices or was a person who perpetrated harassment, they're probably not going to be in a great mood when they go in front of the head of HR at a particular company, and you're sort of helping navigate the company with that. So you've got to be okay with sort of difficult situations and kind of have a strong stomach. Real estate, again, I would put this in the same category as corporate. At times, it can be adversarial. Sometimes the parties are perfectly happy to engage in the transaction, and sometimes they are not. And then the same thing with trust and estates. People, there's this little joke in the legal world which says that you see people's true colors when someone passes away, and oftentimes if you are dealing with the probate part of this, you're dealing with people who are very unhappy or wanting to know if this is the right will and demanding certain things, and sometimes they will try to take it out on their attorney. So you have to keep that in mind. On the other side of the house, anything that's administrative or regulatory in nature, generally speaking, it has less of an adversarial bent. Compliance work, bankruptcy, you would think bankruptcy would be kind of more adversarial, but at the end of the day, the federal bankruptcy laws are what rule, and the people that are dealing with this are kind of at the mercy of that. The federal government's involved, it is what it is. Finance, again, that there's not tons of emotion involved in that usually. And then, these other, again, litigation is sort of another example. It depends on who's litigating and what the problem is. But it can be sort of up here, if it's a corporate matter, you don't necessarily have, it doesn't necessarily have to be super adversarial, but it's something to think about when you're considering where you'd like to go.
So I'm not very good with the slides today. I don't know what's happening. Okay, how important is a predictable schedule to you? So, obviously this is the context of sometimes big law, sometimes not, and there's lots of things that go into this. So, just again, a sort of higher level thought piece. But, think about what sort of lifestyle you want and what you want to achieve. It's important. Do you want to live in a big city? And we're going to talk about relocation in a minute and how you can use that maybe down the line into something else, but also within the practices, you've got to think about who you're working for, and there's always a client, there's always somebody paying the bill, and so when they're paying the bill, they say jump and you say how high, I think if you look at sort of if having a very predictable schedule and something like that, longer term. Government agencies, generally have very sort of process-oriented, very systematic ways of working. As do sort of trust and estate, land, IP prosecution. Sometimes deadlines are set by the courts or by judges and things like that. And so there is an element, of sort of predictability of schedule within that. And that's not saying it's a walk in the park, because it's certainly not. But it just there can sometimes be a bit more structure there. If it's not particularly important to you, and this can change, this can be at later points of your career, can be now, and it can change if you have a family, you move somewhere else, you meet someone, or whatever happens. Those things feed into it, but certainly, corporate, for example, if you're in a big cross-border practice, when I was in Hong Kong, those lawyers would be working in the day and then take all their US calls at night. In litigation, in real estate, if bankruptcy, you're working with clients who are, hugely stressed under a lot of pressure and need, answers yesterday. And so, they're paying your bills. You've got to be quick. It's competitive to win the business anyway. And so delivery is really important. The flip side is you get ebbs and flows, and often, you'll be busy for a while and then have a nice break. And, it's all about kind of finding balance that works within your life. And it's just probably things to think about more in the longer term, but also can be helpful when you're, making plans about practice area and everything like that.
So another question, where can you take your law degree? Where can your law degree take you outside of a law firm? And again, to underline this point, we are just giving you some food for thought today. We are not going to solve all your pressing career questions in an hour. And so I just want to highly encourage you to reach out to Betsy and other members of the Vanderbilt staff and the Career Services Office. about this. I've asked your professors about this, about what, where an expertise of a particular type can take you. So just some examples. If you do corporate M&A work for a law firm for a number of years, that is a very great segue to either go in-house and then sort of slowly make your way over to the business side of a company. A lot of people with this experience start their own companies or get involved with startups and other types of business-related opportunities, including private equity shops. Capital markets, and if you don't know what that is, again, resources, that's, dealing with like sort of stocks and bonds, anything that you deal with, on Wall Street. Folks who have expertise in this area sometimes go to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Sometimes they, again, sort of segue on into the maybe the sort of start of getting out of a law firm and going to a company is working in the legal department of a public company. But also sometimes the company may be private, but its owners know that they plan to eventually take it public, and so they want, and we do a lot of placement in this area for these reasons, they want people with capital markets expertise. Banking, finance, easy segue to any kind of financial institution, including a bank. Again, private equity shops are a great source for those folks. A lot of people even go to Wall Street if they have that background. Litigation, we sometimes see people leave law firms and go be an AUSA. They go work for the Securities and Exchange Commission sometimes, other types of governmental type entities where, it's like they understand what it is to be on one side and represent the client against the government. And that's a valuable experience if you want to then go work for the government. A boutique firm sometimes. Also, we do on occasion, I think sometimes this move is a little more difficult, see them go into in-house with a company. It depends on the size of the company. If the company is sort of embroiled in lots and lots of litigation, I'll give you an example. In my hometown here, Home Depot, you can imagine, given the number of stores that they have, how much, Lowe's is also another example, how much litigation they have in terms of slip and falls in their stores. Tons of it. They have a whole division inside the company, inside their legal department, that's all those people, former litigators, deal with all day in, day out, dealing with insurance companies, settling those cases, dealing with those cases, that kind of thing. Intellectual property. And we're sort of thinking, this could work either if you're an IP litigator and you have the technology or a STEM background, science, technology, engineering background, or if you are doing like the prosecution of patents and that kind of thing. Again, depending on the company, the size of the company. I have a friend that I actually just talked to yesterday who was an engineer at Georgia Tech, went to go work for Kilpatrick Stockton as an IP attorney, and then made the leap to Global Payments, which is a technology company here in Atlanta, and that's the way his path went. Real estate, working for REITs or developers, doing finance work, all of that can follow, doing some work inside of a law firm under the real estate umbrella. And I've also seen the people go into government, like working for a municipality after having a real estate career in law. Tax, again, the tax expertise is very transferable into corporations and businesses of all size and type. And then labor and employment is one that's really, really broad, and people don't always think about it this way. Every company has people, and labor and employment deals with people, and so they may not have lots and lots of attorneys that specialize in labor and employment on the corporate side of the house, but everybody needs some expertise in this area. And then I've also seen on occasion people move to a company and then kind of work their way up or directly into a human resources function. The guy, I don't know if it's the current person, but I think it's the previous person who was head of HR at Turner Broadcasting, was a former labor and employment attorney at a large law firm. So that just gives you a few examples to think about. Do you have any additional comments about this, Nathan?
No, I think that was great. I love the Home Depot example, and I guess that you know sort of like how all of these sort of daily interactions and these kind of very general things all kind of lead to a legal team somewhere, and it's always interesting to think about it like that, and where there could be opportunity, So it's sort of everywhere, which is good. And this kind of ties in nicely. Where do you want to live? It's always one of my favorite slides. Obviously, you know, having lived in a few places and stuff. So I'll cover this on both levels. You know, there's a lot of national and international opportunity, really. You know, when I was in New York, let's say, like example, you know, a number of people would spend a few years in BigLaw and then want to go home. You know, down to Atlanta or over to the West Coast or to Chicago, and you know, what you generally find, and Rebecca be probably able to add some more colours to this, and you know, specifics in the market, but outside of, you know, New York and some of the markets, practices tend to be very general. So if that's something you want to do try and, you know, get exposed to other things. If you're in New York and just doing M&A, just try and get a little bit of capital markets, try and get a bit of, you know, sort of general corporate advisory or something like that, that just can add a few extra spokes to your boat. I think, you know, the benefit is you often can really carry that brand that you've got and move into another market very well. You know, if you've trained at a top firm and been doing work there, you know, firms will really like that. But you also need to be prepared for the switch. You're not going to get necessarily the New York scale salary sometimes. You know, the work is going to be a bit different in terms of level, in terms of scope. And so you need to be able to show, as much as you want to come home and you've got this great experience, but you are somebody that can kind of turn your hand to lots of different things and, you know, do other things within the scope of the practice. You know, Rebecca, you want to add anything more on the national bit before I go to international?
Yeah, definitely. Two points. And again, a lot of you are very junior, and so I'm hoping you'll remember this. You may want to write this one down. You know, what Nathan said is completely true. I won't go too much into this, but it's the nature of the beast. It has to do with the size of the various, you know, New York, Chicago, DC, LA. These are very, very big markets, huge legal markets with very, very big firms, lots of international firms, lots of massive clients, massive international clients. And because they're dealing, you know, they're working at this very, very high level, the way the work is divvied up and the way that you as a junior associate will be utilized is a bit different than the way a smaller firm based in Nashville or Atlanta or Charlotte or Birmingham will utilize you. And as Nathan said, you're going to be much more likely to be, especially if you're in BigLaw, but even if you're in sort of mid-level law in those bigger cities, your practice is likely to be much more specialized. That is not problematic. Okay, I get a question a lot of times, I want to go to New York for a couple of years and then I want to come back home to Nashville. That's what I do on a daily basis. 90% of my placements, maybe more this year, post-pandemic, are people relocating from larger markets. The only cautionary piece of that, and I agree with Nathan, if you are in a niche, kind of fairly narrow practice, you're, you know, to the extent that you have bandwidth and can politically get some work from some of these other places and exposure to lots of different things, great, wonderful. I encourage you to do it because it's definitely going to set you apart from other candidates when you're trying to relocate. But the other thing that I cannot emphasize enough is you should, if your plan is, I want to go to New York, I want to go to DC, I want to go to Chicago first, and then I want to come back home to Nashville, Knoxville, whatever, a smaller Atlanta, southern market, southeastern market, you have to be careful about when you do it, okay? The ideal time is somewhere between your third and sixth associate years at a firm. If you get too senior and you have an uber niche practice, it's going to make it more difficult for you to move back down south. And again, it goes back to some of these sort of economic factors that I alluded to in the beginning. The firm is going to feel like they need to retrain you or train you from scratch in other areas. And they're going to look at how you're being billed at your old firm, and they're going to say, can we afford to do this? Do we have capacity to train this person? And it's like an economic decision. And it's just something that I think is important to note. And it's important as you get more senior, you get to the third, fourth, fifth, sixth years of practice, that you get some counsel, whether it's from a recruiter or someone inside your firm or a mentor, or you talk to the folks at your alma mater, Vandy, to make sure you get the timing right in terms of coming back. But aside from that, I think working in a larger market is great, and I think it can advantage you, once you decide you want to come back to a smaller market.
Absolutely. And some of those things translate internationally as well. So there's lots of locations that you can think about. As a general rule, transactional practices travel well. Capital markets, the corporate finance, those are the ones that you can really take that skill set and work anywhere because you know your way around a document, you know your way around a transaction, and you can go into other markets. Each place has its own sort of demands and requirements. Let's take Asia, for example, in Hong Kong and China, FCPA investigations practices were actually very popular. You could go there, with that skill set, but you also needed Chinese language skills. So that's something that, it's something you can leverage. Capital markets as well, the same sort of thing. In London, US corporate practices exist, but in a different sort of way to, what they do in New York and other markets. So London is very much a kind of high yield debt capital market, and that's changing a bit. And there is some ECM and M&A coming through, particularly with tech firms. That's something that we're sort of seeing is really on trend. But it's a very different sort of experience. And so you come here and use that time to travel and do everything like that. But you do need to think, what's my longer term plan? If I want to go back to the US, do I want to do high yield work, forever and go back to New York, go back to somewhere else? And what's that going to look like? So if you do want to go to an overseas market, again, keeping broad experience, trying to stay transactional, thinking about, do I need language skills? Do I need a specific skill set? And you don't need language skills for everywhere. Like I said, you can go to London. There are Paris and Frankfurt are big markets, Singapore, Sydney. There's a lot of opportunity around the world that is sort of, open to lawyers from different places. And it's, certainly my experience has been in my job, just being able to live in these places and work and have that experience has been, something I really encourage. I think it really kind of gives you new perspective and ideas in your career, and it's something I always, I guess, kind of like to kind of push and tell. Okay, so the last slide is how might current market conditions impact your practice group selection. So this is, I was thinking about this before we do it, and Rebecca and I just sort of chat through, and then we'll go on to your questions. I mean, it's changed so much. When March hit and everything stopped, I think everybody just thought, what are we going to do? What's going to happen to the world? What's going to happen to the legal industry? What's going to happen to our jobs? It was crazy. And then very relatively quickly and reflection, things just sort of turned busy in different things, and we've seen these hot bursts of areas. So in New York, I was there all last year. We went to restructuring, and then it was capital markets, and a bit of corporate M&A is starting to pick up, and finance is getting busier, and we've seen this whole cycle go through. And I think the big transactional practices always will give you work. And we saw a lot of people during the pandemic, qualified attorneys who were doing lots of different things and getting involved in different practice areas. Data privacy and cybersecurity is still a huge practice area. Healthcare was exploding. Rebecca and I worked with people together on in some healthcare spaces where there was a peak of demand. Tax is always going to be an area that people want expertise and help in. And that can always be, a way to sort of future-proof yourself and your practice. And think about industries as well, emerging companies, again, healthcare, life sciences, technology, venture capital, financial services is always going to be there. These are sort of the real kind of, cornerstones of practices that a lot of firms are sort of based on, that, will always kind of keep you busy and in some respects, can sort of help future-proof what you're doing.
Agreed. And I think, just sort of a broader comment on this, I think as law school students, you're very busy, right? You've got huge course loads, you're on law review, you're trying to find a job, you have personal responsibilities. A pandemic happened last year. Oh, that too, adding that to your plate. There's a lot going on, and as you continue to progress in your career, you will also continue to have a lot going on, probably more, when you start a family or buy a house or relocate for your new job. And I think that there is this tendency to sort of like have blinders on sometimes. I think I was a little bit like this when I was a law school student, and not be sort of paying attention to trends, or, I don't have time to read the news, or I don't, being aware of what is sort of hot, or what companies or what industries are growing and which ones are shrinking. But I do encourage you to spend a little bit of time each week or a little bit of time each month sort of paying attention to this, because what drives hiring in law firms is what's happening with their clients, and the clients that are not doing a lot of business or are faltering, like, some of the stuff the hospitality businesses were last year, that there wasn't a lot of hiring in the legal facets that serve those types of industries. And the same thing on the other side, emerging companies, financial services, we're getting tons of requests for real estate finance, fund finance, corporate finance. I have more requests than I have people to fill those roles right now. Healthcare, same thing. I have 5 healthcare needs and 1 good, strong healthcare, candidate to service those needs. Life sciences, I think anything in the sort of IP space, any industry that is constantly, needing, sort of biotech, pharma type stuff with all of the vaccination things that are happening. Those companies, Pfizer and Moderna, need counsel. And they've got lots of outside counsel helping them and advising them, and anything in that space, technology and venture capital. And I have to agree that these trends, while, Nathan is viewing them from the lens of, New York, Hong Kong, London, Singapore, Shanghai, he's got his sort of eye fixed on that. Me, looking domestically and sort of looking at the entire southeast of the country, which is sort of my bread and butter, where I do most of my work. These same trends, are evident in this space as well. With regard to those of you who are really sort of, heart set on being a litigator, litigation isn't going away, right? The court system in the United States is not going to disappear overnight. There's still opportunities for litigators, particularly those that have somewhat niche practice, IP litigation, healthcare litigation, ERISA litigation, construction litigation, insurance coverage litigators. These are areas where I'm still seeing some need. I would say from a volume perspective, I'm not seeing as much need as I am in the areas that you see on your screen. But I do want to reassure you that if you do want to do litigation, and that's kind of where you'd really like to start your career, there are opportunities there. We're just sort of speaking in terms of, our clients calling us and saying, I need X. And these are the areas that are kind of really hot right now, and we see being sort of hot for the foreseeable future, 2021 and probably well into 2022.
Absolutely. Great. So questions now. These are details. Just put it on screen. But like I said, we're recording this, so I'm just going to switch to the. One second.
And guys, I am happy to start off with the questions while we're waiting for some. Just to start off with, since most firms hire entry-level associates as a general, like litigation, general, corporate, or as unassigned, what is your best advice for junior associates to start to create a specialty or get in with the practice group they really want to be with?
Do you want me to kick that off, Nathan, or do you want to?
Sure.
Yeah. Start? Yeah. So again, I think the starting point, but it's a great, fantastic question, and one we get often. And I think the starting point, ideally, for those of us who are either listening to this presentation or are self-aware, is to thine own self be true, right? If it's not a good fit, ultimately down the line, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years into your career, you're not going to be happy. And so I think, there are things that students can do now that answering these questions for yourself, and maybe the answer, there are people who are sort of like ambidextrous, or when they come to their career, they would be equally happy being a litigator or being in the transactional space, perhaps, or they just don't know. A couple of things you can do. Again, some self-analysis with the help of your career services office. 1, 2, talking to as many lawyers as possible. And this is not something I myself did enough of when I was in law school. Friends you know, family members you know who are lawyers. If you don't personally know a lot of lawyers because maybe you're the first person in your family to go to law school, talk to your career services office about alumni that you can speak to. Go to alumni events. Go to events where there are alumni. Figure out a way to talk to people, ideally, who are doing what you want to do, to understand their path. How did they get there? You know, was it a straight line? Was it very circuitous? And if you're not sure, all the better. Talk to more lawyers, because then you will have a better sense of what do they do on a daily basis? How do they get to the position they're currently in? So I would start there, actually, even ideally before you even get to summer clerkship, right? Or some, you know, being a summer at a particular firm. However, once you kind of have a general idea of what it is that you want to do, first of all, learn to network. And again, the Career Services Office is a great source for that. There's also some materials online. You can Google how to network, and a bunch of YouTube videos will pop up. Even if you are, let's say the firm assigns you to something that you're not terribly excited about, okay? You should be spending your free time, whatever that is, weekends, evenings, before an assignment is due, after an assignment is due, talking to and reaching out to, in a professional and appropriate manner, attorneys in that firm that are actually more close to what it is you want to. Say they assign you to litigation, but you really want to do transactional work. First, let it be known when it's appropriate. Tell the people, the powers that be, that you'd really like to do this instead of that. But if you, again, keeping in mind that these are businesses, right? And, you know, they have needs. And if they need you in litigation, they're going to put you in litigation, right? But you still should be doing your best to, again, appropriately and professionally tell people what you want to do. And number two, rubbing up against, ingratiating yourself with the people who are doing what you actually want to do, and talking to them. Hey, they assigned me to litigation. You know, you take them, well, I don't know, we're starting to do lunches now. I hope this coming summer people will actually be going in and eating together. Let's pretend that's the case. Or if not the case, you can pick up the phone and have this conversation. You have a coffee with someone who you're not assigned to, and you say, hey, I want to learn more about what you're doing, right? And you get them talking about it. And then when they finish telling you what it's about, you still say, yeah, I want to do this work. You then ask them questions and you follow up and say, you know, I'd like to do some work for you. Is that possible? If not, how can I do more of this work? And it's sort of a slow thing that you might have to do if you're not immediately thrust into the type of work that you prefer to be doing, if that makes sense. Any additional thoughts, Nathan, on that point? I know it's a little long-winded answer for a short question.
No, I think I covered it. I mean, my two kind of, you know, pieces of advice generally, pretty much that. Like, people love talking about themselves, so you can always say, you know, ask questions and network that way. Tell me how you got here. And if you don't ask, you don't get. You know, you've got to be bold. You've got to ask the question, and obviously in a, you know, polite way, and everything that goes with that. But you know, people don't know what you're thinking if you don't sort of ask. And I'd say that's something worth doing. We got a first question.
We have a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what's the most common mistake you hear from lawyers trying to move to a new practice area or market? I'd say for me, I think it really comes down to a lack of planning. And that's usually sort of the common theme. You know, if it's really hard to switch practice areas, you know, it really is. There are occasional, you know, glimmers where it can happen, and I'm not saying anything's impossible. I don't believe it is. But, you know, I can count so many times you speak to 8th, 9th year litigators who aren't getting partnership. They want to move in-house to Google. And, like, it's really unlikely going to happen unless Google need an 8th, 9th year litigator for something. And you know, as Rebecca mentioned earlier, obviously there are departments that have, you know, a lot of litigators or ex-litigators in them. But you know, if you don't think about these things, which I guess why the point of this presentation is to try and help you start thinking of some of those things. You know, your career is a long journey, and it's not all about the first 5 years in practice. And you know, sometimes doing M&A for 3 to 5 years to stepstone to something bigger that you want to do down the line, you know, I think that's where you see the most success, and therefore, you know, not necessarily the mistake. And like I said, I don't think anything's impossible, but it is, you know, to me, the most common thing is it's sort of that lack of planning, and sort of thought, and just, you know, wanting to do it at the very end when it's you've sort of gone past all the opportunity.
Yep, I totally agree with Nathan, completely. I have, it's a frustration to me because I want to help folks, right? You know, I'll get a Skadden associate in New York who's been doing this sort of very niche type of corporate work, and this person's in 8th or 9th year, and they know they're not going to make partner, and they're not having any luck going in-house, and they're telling me now they want to come back to Georgia or Tennessee or wherever. And, you know, there's two problems with that. You know, number one, I may not be able to help you because you've waited too long. You're not in that sort of key 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 year place. And then sometimes a firm will give you a look and maybe consider taking a chance on you, even if, you know, maybe because you've got some good skills, right, and a great background, and you went to Vandy, and you went to a great undergrad, you did really well, and you're clearly a very smart person. But what it also involves is oftentimes the firms will make you take several laps in seniority. So if he's a 9th year at Skadden, they might say, well, okay, we'll bring you as a 6th or 7th, maybe, probably more like a 6th or a 5th. Because it's based on their needs, right? They have a problem and they're looking for somebody to fix it, right? It's very different than OCI when you're moving laterally. It's, you know, the employers are not coming to you, you're coming to them. It's a different dynamic. And so what that means is almost sort of hitting the reset button, both in terms of compensation. So if they feel like they got to train you and they have to bring you down to the 5th year level to do it, you're not going to get comped like a 9th year. And then again, this is something that, you know, is worth educating yourself on. Obviously, the cost of living in one market is very different than the cost of living in another market. And so you're automatically going to take a hit coming back. So save your money, number one. Don't spend it all on a Porsche. I know I'm teasing because most of you have student loans like I still do, and a lot of that money is going to the government. But save your money so that you have some flexibility. Be fiscally smart, and also plan. Educate, you know, if in your head it's like, eventually I do want to come home. Yeah, I want to come back to Nashville or Birmingham or wherever. Talk to people about what that should look like. Get advice from people who've done it. Or are smarter than you, and have been down this road before and made the mistakes that I made, and find out what the nuances are for the market and when you should move, and, you know, start talking to a recruiter maybe after your 2nd year, not because you want to move at year 3, maybe you want to move at year 4, but like start to understand what the process looks like. Plan, as Nathan said. We've got another question, Nathan, I think.
Yeah. So how much should we pay attention to fiscal measures by firms in response to the pandemic and firm merger talks when evaluating which firms to summer with? Brooke, you want to start with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, with some new, fantastic question. So let me begin by saying this. You know, a lot of firms, especially those at the very, very top of the, you know, AmLaw 50, let's say, and additionally some firms at the middle and the bottom, did what they did, whether that was furloughs last year. In some cases there were firings, in some cases there were no bonuses or lesser bonuses or delayed bonuses or delayed money to the partners. They did it in an abundance of caution because they were trying to learn from 2008, 2009, 2010 during the Great Recession when I was a young associate. And, you know, a lot of them did it in abundance of caution, but they also felt like they had to do it, right, to make sure that the ship stayed afloat. And, you know, for those firms that didn't do it at all, great. Those are sure bets. Those are awesome. Feel free to fly with those planes. That's great. For those that did it and then rolled back the measures, you know, the bonuses were delayed, or the bonuses came in 2 parts instead of 1, or the partners initially took a hit, but then subsequently got all their money back, okay? Those are also a good bet. I don't think a firm should be have a mark against it or carry a red letter because, number one, so many of them did it in an abundance of caution to try to stay, again, fiscally viable. And if they then subsequently rolled everything back, I think we're fine there. The ones that you want to sort of take a critical eye at or critical look at and be sort of careful of and do some digging, and I'm not necessarily saying like, write them off completely, but you want to do some sniffing and you want to ask some hard questions and you want to utilize your career services office to ask really smart questions during OCI or Open to Summer, are the ones that kept these austerity measures in place. That you want to take a closer look at because it sort of hints at maybe the firm wasn't being financially managed well at the start. Again, it depends. I hate to say it, but there are firms out there that took the economic downturn and the recession as an opportunity to get rid of the extra fat, people who weren't producing. And so in some instances, it was a good time for them to do what they really needed to do in the 6 months earlier, a year earlier. And it doesn't necessarily speak to the fiscal viability of that particular firm. And it's hard to get at. I'll be honest with you. It's going to take some art and it's going to take some help from other people to figure that part out. The other two tiers, I believe that you would be fine with moving forward and not have to be concerned with, is this firm going to be here in a year or two when I start as a junior? What do you think about that, Nathan?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the ones, I think it was a really tough time and a lot of uncertainty. And I think, firms' actions always speak volumes, really. And I think that's how I would evaluate it. And mergers can be exciting. I wouldn't worry about that too much. I think you should still look at them and it can bring a lot. And it might be something to ask, if it's public and there's discussion, what's it going to bring to the table? What's it going to bring to the firm? We'll quickly do the last question because I'm conscious of time and I know people have got lots going on. So how closely will firms scrutinize your background and courses when it comes to placing you in the practice area you express interest in or even hiring you? As a quick way, I would definitely say I think it's important. I think they do want to see some consistency there. Again, this comes down to planning, that you've thought about it. And I think there's space to try things and explore, different areas. But I do think that you need to be conscious of what you're choosing on your transcripts and performing in, because I think it's important.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback real quick on what Nathan said. If you worked for a real estate developer before you went to law school, in some other capacity, and you still want to stay in real estate, it's worth mentioning. You should highlight that. If you were a litigation paralegal before you went to law school and you want to be a litigator because you love it, great. You should express that, and they do consider it. I even find myself mentioning earlier activity by candidates when I'm helping them lateral in. I'll say something like, Rebecca has loved real estate since she was a small girl. I'm being a little facetious here. She worked for a developer during undergrad. Then, her father's a real estate developer, and she took all the real estate courses that Vandy had to offer. It's worth mentioning if you have prior experience.
Great. Super. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to listen and everything. And we'll send you a follow-up, and this will be recorded, so if you've got any questions or anything, feel free to reach out. But in the meantime, I just hope you're all safe and well, and I'm sorry it can't be in person. I've literally been thinking about Hattie B's chicken sandwich like the entire time of this presentation, so I might have to dinner now, because that's what we had last. Yeah, so exactly.
Yeah. We'll do it next year.
Send me one.
Definitely. It's a date. Yes.
Thanks, everyone. Stay well. Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having us. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.